Hello, boys and girls. David Ansardi here, and we're going to do your pre-lab on male and female reproductive anatomy. Finally, we're going to learn the differences between boys and girls now that you guys have made it this far into your A&P courses. And it's really easy. You just have to remember that, boys have a woohoo and girls have a hee-haw, and that's all you got to know. Anyway, maybe a little bit more than that, so we'll move on from there. Let's see, I'm going to give you an overview of the male reproductive anatomy. Some of the things, here's your list. This comes from page 65 in your lab guide, so these are the things that you're going to be responsible for knowing, and when we're actually in the lab next time, you will be able to use the reproductive models that we have and go through and identify these structures on the 3D model. So kind of like we've done before, I am going to give you a pre-lab overview. I'll leave some things out that are better left until we're actually in the lab and you're working with the models. This should help you for your lecture content as well when you're hearing about some of these different structures on your lecture videos. Okay, so a few things on the external male anatomy, and then you're also seeing, obviously, some of the internal anatomy down in the scrotum where the two testes are located. So this is just a diagram from your textbook. So the scrotum, of course, that's just the pouch of skin that hangs down, contains the testes on the inside, contains some of the other structures that you're going to be learning about that the sperm cells pass through after they're created in the testes and then have to move on from there. So just keep in mind the scrotum is referring to the pouch, and then the testes are these egg-shaped endocrine glands that are sitting there inside the scrotum. And these are the testes are the primary reproductive organs of males, and as you're going to be learning about, those are where your sperm cells are produced. So we're taking a look at that there. Obviously, this is the external male anatomy. This is the penis, which I'm sure everybody knows that already. And this is actually considered to be one of the secondary reproductive organs of males. That might not be your first instinct if somebody asked you what was the primary and what was the secondary reproductive organ of a male, but actually the testes are the primary ones because that's where the gametes are made, the sperm cells. Okay, so some other structures that we can see here. All right, shortly I'm going to walk you through the pathway of sperm through the male reproductive system after they're made in the testes on each side. This structure here that has been cut open, that is the spermatic cord. And that is actually a bundle that includes the vas deferens or the ductus deferens. That's the tube that carries the sperm from here in the testes this way towards the point where they're going to be released from the body. Then you have blood vessels, you have nerves, you have lymphatic vessels bundled up together, and then they're covered in some connective tissue, kind of like a bundle of wires that you would have going to your computer. So that's called the spermatic cord, that bundle of all of those different things. And of course, you have one of those on each side. You've got some muscles that cover these structures down here in the scrotum. When those contract, that helps withdraw the testes toward the closer to the male body. When they relax, that allows them to move away from the male body, which that's actually important for sperm production. You don't want the testes to be internal or close to the human body where they're being exposed to really warm temperatures, because that's not optimal for sperm production. Let's see, another thing I want to point out here on this diagram. Here's the epididymis, and we'll take another look at that more closely when we look at visible body. And here's another view. Here's the spermatic cord, not cut completely open like it is over here. So there's the connective tissue that's wrapping it up. And now this cord has to pass back into the abdominopelvic cavity, as you might imagine. And so there has to be an opening in your abdominopelvic cavity wall here that allows that to pass through, and that opening is called the inguinal canal. So that's one of the things you need to pay attention to from your lab guide. All right, and then if we look at this from a side view, a lateral view, or like through a mid-sagittal section, here's a testis. Testis is the singular form of testes down in the scrotum. So sperm cells are produced there. They next pass into the epididymis, this structure that kind of curves around the backside of the testis. And as they're doing that, they're maturing, getting a little bit better at swimming and so forth, finishing their maturation processes. Then they move through this tube. This is what we call the ductus deferens or the vas deferens. Moving up, moving up. Now this is actually inside that spermatic cord that we were taking a look at earlier, but that's not shown here in this mid-sagittal section. And then that's going to pass through that inguinal canal here. Now the ductus deferens is out of that spermatic cord. Notice it kind of wraps around the top of the bladder and then goes all the way around the back side. And then it gets wider toward the end. That's called the ampulla of the ductus deferens here. And it's right up next to, and you got two of these. Remember, you've got two vas deferens, one on each side. And so you have two of these. You have two seminal vesicles on each side. Seminal vesicles are glands that produce some of the fluids that are going to be present in the semen. So semen, which is the fluid that gets ejaculated, contains the sperm plus fluids from the seminal vesicle and then also from the prostate gland, which you see right in here that's been cut open in a sagittal section. And also has some fluids in it from the bulbourethral glands that are located here. Okay, so your sperm move through here, get combined with fluids from the seminal vesicle. Then they move into this little section of tubing. That's called the ejaculatory duct. And that's where they hang out until ejaculation takes place, when a male has an orgasm. This little tube here, guess what that is? That's the urethra, which is leading out of the bladder right here. So that's got urine in it. And ordinarily, the ejaculatory duct stays closed, so the urine is passing this way through the urethra, through the penis, to the external urethral orifice, so it can be released to the outside. Now, when a male ejaculates semen, the fluid that's stored here, and it's picked up some additional fluids from the prostate gland as well, passes into the urethra all along that little road to the outside of the penis here at the external urethral orifice. So again, you'll need to be able to identify those structures on the models the next time you're in the lab. This little guy here, you got two of these too if you're a boy. Those are called bulbourethral glands. And you notice they've got little ducts that connect into the urethra as well. And those produce lubricating fluids that are released into the urethra ahead of ejaculation. So those are your pre-ejaculatory fluids. And one of the things that those do is they provide lubrication, and for sexual intercourse, that's one thing they do. And then it helps neutralize the pH along the urethra because it's had urine passing through it. So the pH needs to be made more friendly for the little sperm cells that are going to be ejaculated into the urethra. Okay, some of the other structures you see here highlighted in blue, those are the erectile tissues of the penis, which you'll be hearing more about on one of your lecture video clips, and then we'll also be taking a closer look at those on visible body here in a second. I'm going to go ahead and bring up visible body, and let's see, I've actually got this pulled up already. If you are using visible body at home, go to your reproductive views, and I think to me the best one there, they've got a whole bunch of different male. Be sure to pick male up here rather than female. And I think the best one for us to take a look at, now you got several here that you can play around with if you would like, but I'm going to pick the one that says prostate and bladder because I think it's going to give us the best perspective. Trying to zoom out a little bit here. So obviously a lot of things have been removed so we can see the major structures a little bit better. But in 3D here. And kind of move this around and take a look at some things. All right, here's a testis. Here's a testis. And again, your sperm cells are made there first. Then they move into, I'll rotate this around, epididymis on each side. They move from there into the ductus deferens or the vas deferens on each side. Now when a male has a vasectomy procedure for sterilization, they slice the vas deferens on each side right around in here, and that cuts off the flow of sperm through the ductus deferens toward the outside of the body, and that's why the male becomes sterile. And if you follow along, the ductus deferens on each side, vas deferens on each side, wraps around the top of the bladder. And then let's move back here to the back. So this is the bladder. So guess what these tubes are? That's your ureter or ureter on each side. Here's a vas deferens, here's a vas deferens. This is where it gets wider. Right in here, right in here. Here's your seminal vesicle on each side. And then right in here is where the fluids from the seminal vesicle and the little sperm cells combine together, and they enter the ejaculatory duct on each side. So this is your prostate gland. So notice that's sitting underneath the bladder in the male. And I'm going to hide that so we can see what's happening inside the prostate gland. And if we look at this from the side, you can get a little bit better of a 3D perspective. There's the urethra leading out of the bladder, passes through the prostate. That's why when males get older and they start having prostate inflammation, that can squeeze on the urethra right there, and that can cause them to have problems with urination as they get older. These little thin tubes here, those are the two ejaculatory ducts. Okay, so that is, again, that's got fluids from the seminal vesicles, the sperm cells that came from the vas deferens, and also fluids from the prostate gland that we've hidden. And now right in here, when ejaculation occurs, these little tubes open your ejaculatory ducts and release the semen, the combination of the sperm and all those fluids, into the urethra, and then that's going to pass all the way through the penis. All right, then here are your two little bulbourethral glands that produce the pre-ejaculatory fluids that provide lubrication and also help neutralize the pH along your pathway of the urethra through the penis, so that the sperm cells will be a little happier in the environment. All right, so in lab, when you guys take a look at the model next week, you'll be looking at the different erectile tissues of the penis. So these are the spongy tissues that fill with blood as blood vessels dilate in the penis and cause erection to take place. So those penile tissues, if you're kind of looking here at the side, there's one on the bottom, and that's called the corpus spongiosum. So that extends all the way toward the very back and internal, inside the male's body. And then up on top, you have two. Each of those is a corpus cavernosum, and the two together are the corpora cavernosa. And then notice that those two kind of form, they kind of flare out on each side inside the male body. The head of the penis is called the glans, or the glans penis. And in uncircumcised males, if they still have a skin covering over the glans penis, that is called the prepuce, which is there in your lab guide on page 65. Prepuce is the name for the foreskin. These structures in the back, if I kind of rotate this around, well, that's kind of a wild view there, isn't it? These two structures that flare out inside the male body help anchor the penis to the muscular tissues on the inside here. Those are called the crura, or a crus on each side. One here, oops, I didn't mean to zoom in like that. One here, and then this portion of the penis that helps anchor it to the muscles there in the abdominopelvic cavity. That's called the bulb of the penis. And I think that covers most of the structures. Obviously, the opening of the penis is called the external urethral orifice. All right, so let's get rid of visible body here for a second. And let's move on to the structures of the female reproductive system. And we got a little bit more going on in the females, as you might imagine. But you can see your list here. And so in the lab next week, we'll take a look at the pregnant uterus models. I'm not going to cover that now. And also, we'll take a look at the structures in the breasts that you need to know also for the female reproductive anatomy. Let me actually flip over to this picture first. Let's talk about the external structures of the female reproductive anatomy first. Okay, so on this view on the female, this is obviously the opening to the vagina. That's called the vaginal orifice. And then just above that, or well, if you think about a female in anatomical position, this is going to be anterior to the vaginal orifice. This opening is the opening to the urethra. That's your urethral orifice. And then if you move upward from there, there you have the clitoris, which is analogous to the glands or the head of the penis on a male. Okay, so actually during embryonic development, the clitoris and the penis develop from the same structures in the embryo. Okay, the surface that you see here that contains the urethral orifice and the vaginal orifice, the surface along there is called the vestibule. So all that surface area there. You got a couple of glands that produce lubricating fluid. Here, those are the vestibular glands. Those were actually not visible on the models that we have in labs, so take a look at those on the diagrams. All right, now the inner folds that cover the vestibule and the openings that you see here, those are called the labia minora. So labia actually refers to lips. So the inner folds are the labia minora. The outer skin folds that you see here and here are called the labia majora. The clitoris does have a prepuce too, skin that covers it like a foreskin. That's called the prepuce of the clitoris. And then above there, the soft mound of fatty tissue is called the mons pubis. So those are your external structures. I don't think I left anything out. Let me move back this way. And we'll take a look at the internal structures in the female by looking at a mid-sagittal section. And this will kind of give you some perspective. You guys have seen this view before in lab. Now here on the posterior side of the body back here, in this view, oh come on. This is actually the last part of the colon, the rectum that you're seeing back here. So that's of course posterior, and then there's the anus, the opening from the rectum to the outside world. And then as you move anterior from there, there's your little vestibular glands that we were just taking a look at. Here's the vagina, which leads to the uterus right in here. And the uterus kind of curves over anteriorly and over the top of the bladder. So that's why when a woman gets pregnant and the fetus that's developing in there is pressing down on the bladder, and that's why pregnant women have to pee a lot, because that's happening. Move forward from there, there's your bladder, and then there's the urethra in the female that's leading to the opening that's a little bit more anterior on the female. And if you move forward from there, this is where the clitoris is located, and you can see the glands of the clitoris is exposed to the outside. And the little blue tissues you see there in the diagram, those are erectile tissues of the clitoris. So again, this is analogous to the erectile tissues that are present in the male. Up here at the top, so the little white structure you see up there, that's an ovary. Of course, women have two of those on each side. And then the tube that will carry the oocyte, the developing egg cell that is released from the ovary during each female's monthly cycle, that will travel into this. This is what you commonly call the fallopian tube, but that can also be called the uterine tube as well. And these little finger-like structures that kind of form almost like a cap over the top of the ovary here, those are called the fimbriae or the fimbriae. Either one of those pronunciations is fine for those structures. Let's see, while we're looking at this view though, let's talk about the three regions of the uterus. So right up here in this portion where it kind of forms a dome, that's called the fundus of the uterus. So right in there. And then your main portion right in here is called the body. Okay, and then the last part of the uterus that connects to the vagina, this is the cervix. That's where the cervix is located. And notice how the vagina has these little indentations that wrap around the cervix on each side. Each of those is called a fornix. And the plural of that is fornices, the two fornices. Let's see, how about the tissue layers of the uterus? So the uterus has an inside lining that's called the endometrium. That's epithelial tissue. And then most of the uterus has a muscular wall in the middle. That's called the myometrium. This should be reminding you quite a bit of the heart. And then the outside covering is called the parametrium, that you see right there. Let's see. With the vaginal wall down in here, you have an inside lining that's basically called the mucosal layer. That's the mucosal membrane inside lining of the vagina. Then most of the vagina is muscular, so you have a muscular layer in the middle. And then finally you have a connective tissue covering along the outside here and here, and that's called the fibrous layer of the vaginal wall. All right, let's see. Let me pause this just for a second while I get visible body loading. Hang on. All right, so this is a visible body view of the internal structures of the female reproductive system that I have chosen. And if you are using visible body under the female reproductive views, this is number 9, internal genitalia. But of course, visible body has lots of different views that you can take a look at. So looking down in here in the pelvic cavity, now the bladder is not actually shown. All right, what I'm going to do, I'm going to hide some of the bones here so we can get a little bit better access to what's going on. All right, so this will give you some perspective about, here are the ovaries. There's an ovary there, and of course you have one over on the other side. And then there are the little finger-like projections. Those are called the fimbriae. And one thing I did leave out, this very first portion of the fallopian tube, also called the uterine tube, also called the oviduct. That's another name for this. That's called the infundibulum. So remember, you had another infundibulum that you learned about before as well, connecting the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. Well, here's another one. So right in there, that first portion of the uterine tube that is connected to those little finger-like projections. Okay, so oocyte, a female gamete, those are released from the ovaries, and they kind of float temporarily. They're kind of floating out there. The fimbriae here don't actually physically contact the ovary, so it kind of floats through the peritoneal fluids temporarily, and then it enters past the fimbriae into the infundibulum, passes along through the uterine tube, fallopian tube, and now if sperm cells enter here, that's where fertilization takes place, somewhere along the fallopian tubes in there. So the little egg will keep traveling, enters the uterus. And now here in visible body, they're showing you that top portion of the uterus is called the fundus. And then there the middle portion, the main portion is the body, and then that last portion that's going to connect into the vagina is called the cervix. All right, so an unfertilized egg, if you're thinking about the pathway that the egg is going to pass through, it's going to go from the ovary, past those fimbriae, into the infundibulum, through the fallopian tube. It's going to pass will pass the fundus, the body. The uterine tubes connect, the fallopian tubes connect right around where the fundus and the body of the uterus kind of come together. Would pass from there into the cervix. And then if the egg is being released, because a woman that was not fertilized and it's passing out during the menstrual cycle, of course, then it's going to move down into the vagina. There's the vagina. And then, of course, here's the opening to the vagina right there, your vaginal orifice. Okay, so you have those on each side. Another nice thing about visible body, kind of gives you a pretty clear view of some of the structures, like right here, the ovarian ligaments that actually help attach the ovaries to the uterus. So some of those things are harder to see on the models in the lab or to get a good 3D perspective with using the diagrams in the textbook as well. All right. I think that about covers all I wanted to show you as a pre-lab for both the male and the female reproductive anatomy. So I do have a few quiz questions for you to complete, and then you'll be done with the pre-lab. And hopefully this will prepare you to more rapidly move through the work with the models in the lab when we meet for class. See you next time in class. Bye-bye.